Okay, we're live.
Are we now?
Steeping some tea, so we're just getting started, but
Yeah, just hanging out.
alright, so I'm John Brouchoud, founder of Arch Virtual, and this is Julien Lynge.
Howdy. Yeah, so we've worked some together, but we've been working on VR stuff, gosh, I don't know, 5 years now, since the DK1.
Since DK1, since way back,
Yeah.
yeah.
And then before that, did a little experimentation with like some of the cave systems and external projection and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, it's been a long time coming, and now we're getting beyond the virtual, we're getting to the augmented reality, the supposed holy grail.
HoloLens, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Juliana, my daughter, she's trying it out.
Hi.
So yeah, I'll just back up a little bit. So I've known Julien for a long time. He's actually the author of the original Immerse framework that we use as the foundation of everything that we build. So Julien authored that original framework, and it was a really integral part of what we use to be able to sort of start building and prototyping and developing all kinds of VR applications over the years. So
So you can blame me for all the bugs.
So if something goes wrong, it's Julien. It's good stuff. Yeah, we've been working together for a long time, and we're actually on a drive heading west to California. We left Wisconsin last few days ago, and we're staying here at Julien's place in Colorado, Louisville.
Mm-hmm.
Or is it Louisville?
Louisville,
Colorado.
not that other one. Yeah.
So yeah, he's been nice enough to let us stay here. So we're visiting and decided to make a little video podcast about the HoloLens and the future of augmented reality.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it seemed apropos. We've got one sitting in front of us, and the HoloLens, it landed with a splash. I mean, everyone, myself included, was real excited when Microsoft dropped it, and of course, it came to all the meetups, and we all got a chance to try it, and in general, it was a little underwhelming. That was the consensus among folks is this is gonna be cool. We can see where it's going. You can really see it, but it's just not there yet.
It was like the thing. It's a very compelling concept, and it's the very first experience I ever had of augmented reality. Like I've tried augmented reality where you're looking through the phone,
Right.
or through an iPad, but I had never tried, and maybe this was one of the earliest sort of widely available, more accessible versions of a wearable augmented reality. So
Right.
that was pretty cool. Like being able to actually put on a headset and be able to see augmented reality content. It was like, even if there's a limitation of a narrow field of view,
Right.
and there's these limitations to it, it still was like, it's the thing that indicates the thing to come. Like,
Yeah.
that this is, by seeing the HoloLens, it was like a signal to the entire industry, to the world, I think, that this is coming. Like, augmented reality is on its way, and I think it's has huge opportunity, all kinds of different use cases, and this hardware is giving us an opportunity to access some of the hardware so that we can prototype some of these ideas, I think,
Yeah. Yeah, and Microsoft really, when they came out with this, it was not a half-baked project. Like, as you mentioned, wearable, but not just wearable, they encompassed the entire computer, and they came up with a new holographic processing unit, and they did all of this to where it's, I mean, how much does it weigh? A pound, a couple of pounds. It's very, very light.
Yeah.
They could have had it tethered, they could have had it be much more like a demo unit, but obviously they saw where it was going, and they saw that that's what you needed to have. It needed to be self-contained. So they're absolutely ahead of the curve, and now we just need to wait for sort of the technology and the nitty-gritty manufacturing and everything to catch up to the concept.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
I'm really impressed that it doesn't have any cords at all.
Totally cordless.
Yeah.
You're right.
Well, and you've poked around with the HTC Vive and with the Oculus Rift and all that, and the cords, they get in the way.
Mm-hmm.
That's what everyone always asks us about.
Yeah, when you go like around in a game or something, like you get all tangled up and then you try to walk, it's like, oh no, I'll fall over now.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you're totally untethered in augmented reality.
Mm-hmm. And there's no setup, right? You don't have to go into a space and pre-map it or anything. It figures it out as you're playing. So I mean, there is a lot that's very cool to it.
Mm-hmm.
The problem, of course, is things like the field of view. You know, tiny, tiny. But then there's other things too, where, for instance, we're doing rendering that is additive. You know, we're adding colors. And so what that means is if we have a busy space, we can never subtract. If we have something, you know, we're in front of a big painting and it's bright colors, that's going to bleed through and you're not going to be able to see anything in the HoloLens. So it really only works sort of on flat surfaces, on darker surfaces where you can add light and actually get something out of that. Mm-hmm. And that whole darkening thing, being able to render black with essentially a pair of glasses, that's a hard problem.
Mm-hmm. Is that what Magic Leap's going to solve?
Theoretically, that's what they've been telling us for years.
I have no idea what that's going to be, but they just a couple weeks ago started showing off their very first developer kit hardware, and it looks pretty incredible.
Yeah.
Definitely looking forward to getting access to that, because I think there's going to be a lot of... I hear it has a wider field of view than the HoloLens.
Yep.
So yeah, I mean, there's.
I remain skeptical after $2 billion.
It's a lot of money.
I'd like to see more than I've seen. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. The industry is anxiously awaiting, you know, access to the hardware, and then we'll see what it's like. I'm optimistic. You know, I'm hopeful that there's something compelling there. Certainly looking forward to prototyping and testing with it.
Right.
It's interesting that it does actually, it actually has like it obscures your field of view, so you actually are looking through holes.
Right.
Which I'm interested to see how that compares with the HoloLens, where you're looking through more of an open visor, so you can actually see, there's nothing obscuring your view, and then you're seeing the augmented reality view as a smaller sort of inset. Whereas I think, from what I understand with the Magic Leap, it's really everything that you see through those two lenses is going to include the opportunity to have augmented reality content within it.
Yeah.
So that might be interesting to see how that compares.
So I see pluses and minuses, right? I see that it's great because, and I think you mentioned this to me first, is you don't see the edge, basically. And that is really distracting in the HoloLens, is, it's rendering something. It's rendering a monster that you're fighting, and all of a sudden there's a line, and that's the edge of the monster. That's a little weird. Mm-hmm. If instead it's occluded, if the monster simply goes behind a piece of plastic, okay, yeah, that's much more immersive. My brain can forgive that, right? I can let go, I can suspend my disbelief, all that kind of stuff. So I see it as being good. But one of the things that's so promising about AR is just how sort of seamless, but also how social it is. Mm-hmm. And one of the things is you can put on one of these and you can look over at your friends that are standing there as you're playing this game. And once you start getting tunnel vision, does that destroy that experience? Is it? Right. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Well, there's been a lot of talk about how virtual reality is perceived to be a very isolating technology, where you're going into another world and you're really closed off from the rest of reality. And the idea or the assumption is that augmented reality enables you to remain connected with the people around you, so you don't feel as isolated. But when we did we opened the first one that we got before we left on this trip, and I was, in my office setting it up, and I had it all configured, and all, I had a chimpanzee eating a banana sitting on my desk, in augmented reality. And I thought it was pretty cool. But then, my wife Candy came in, and I'm just in augmented reality looking at all the holograms I have in my space, and she can't see any of them. And for all intents and purposes, it's not that much different than if I was in an Oculus Rift, playing a game or doing something in VR. There wasn't really a shared social component unless perhaps she could have had an augmented reality headset on too, and we were networked and synchronized, and then we could both see the same thing. I really didn't see that social advantage at that point.
Well, and you can do that in VR, right? I mean, you guys now have a tool where I poked around with you in Immerse, and it feels really good because you can't see the other people's face, you can't see their expression. We don't have that technology yet, but just being able to see a representation, see what people are interacting with, what they're pointing at, that's surprisingly compelling. Mm-hmm. And you could just have two people that put on headsets and are in the same room, and is that going to be just as good as having two people that are going to be putting on HoloLenses or Magic Leap or whatever else the case may be?
That would be interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah. And you do feel a strong sense of social presence together with a person, even if they're located on the other side of the planet. If you're in virtual reality and you're interacting, it's a very social, connecting kind of experience. And I know Juliana and I have had a lot of fun exploring virtual worlds and multiplayer and playing hide and seek and exploring things and building things and prototyping and just building. You know, it actually feels like, you know, you take the headset off and we feel like we were there together. We were, you know, doing all kinds of things and exploring, and you know, so it does feel very social in that way, and I'll be very interested to see what the social side of augmented reality shapes up to be.
Right.
You know, if there is, you know, 3 or 4 people with augmented reality, can there be a really interesting kind of interaction between those people?
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, I mean, speaking of the whole social aspect, Facebook obviously believes that VR is going to be the social future, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's their investment. That's why they're getting into this technology. So, you know, obviously the brains over there don't think that we need AR to have those experiences.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I'm with you. Is there going to be something cool that comes out of that? Something that we can't foresee until you get a bunch of people in that space?
Yeah, that's just it. It's really hard to imagine until we actually have it and we can look at it. So it'd be interesting to see if we can do some of the multiplayer collaboration within HoloLens. Maybe even combining, you know, I've seen other people doing experiments where someone's in VR and someone's in AR, and they're able to interact with each other and see the same things. And so there's all these sort of interesting things that we'll be able to start exploring.
Well, and not just that, but then people sitting at their computers or on their phones. I play Star Trek Bridge Crew, right?
Yep.
And now they have a version that you can just play on your laptop to play with your friends that are in VR.
That's cool.
So, yeah, those different sort of, you know, they coined the terms mixed reality and XR and all these other things. That's really, I think it's, the term is not so much that we're blending VR and AR as that this technology is just blending into every piece of our life in ways big and small. But
it's almost like there's this digital world that exists around everything, and now we're just finally getting the portals with which to be able to access and visualize that digital world.
Right.
You know, and so it's a very exciting frontier.
Well, but speaking of which, right? Like we're exploring this virtual world, this new space. One of the things that our clients always want, one of the things that we do when we work on projects, and I work in like the medical space, for instance, so VR training apps for doctors and nurses. And what we always look for is the point at which they forget that they're in VR, right? The point at which the rest of the world melts away and they are focusing on, okay, I am learning to do such and such procedure, or, you know, I am engaged in essentially my trade in VR. And if we do things in AR, doesn't that kind of defeat the purpose of, like, I can never really get away from the space I'm in? So is it going to be just less good than VR for a number of applications? Are we going to have to find new applications that AR is good at? Or do you think, even for those types of things, do you think that whole forgetting the rest of the world is maybe less important than we think it is?
That's really interesting, and one of the areas that I've struggled with, and probably the reason why it's taken us a little while to get to the point where we're starting to work with augmented reality, is that there's so many cases where I'm not sure that the physical world really is necessary. You know, I don't know what you're gaining from the physical world. And, you know, you see a lot of augmented reality proofs of concept where, like for example, Magic Leap has a beautiful image of a bunch of students in a big auditorium, and there's a whale jumping out of this basketball court in the auditorium, and I think that's great, but I'm just not sure what value is the basketball, what value is physical reality giving them at that point?
Right.
You know,
why not just be at an aquarium and
yeah. If you've got a dial to be able to say how much augmented versus, you know, virtual you want, if you're looking at a whale jumping out of the ocean, like, I want to be virtual and I want to see the whole ocean. I want to be able to see the horizon. I want to be able to be immersed in that, or underwater. I'm not sure that there's really any value being added by the basketball court that the whale was jumping out of at that point.
And, you know, the early commercials for the HoloLens, you know, what Microsoft was really trying to storytell, trying to pitch, was not even that you would necessarily be going into a virtual world, but rather that we're going to make things appear in our real world. That I'm going to sit at the table for breakfast and the newspaper is in the table, right? Or, you know, I go over and I have a virtual appliance. There's actually no interface. The interface is all virtual. You know, those types of things, or like I'm walking down the street and I don't have to constantly be looking at my phone, which I was reading statistics about how many times we touch our phone in the course of a day. we are addicted. So, anything that gets
So-
us away from that maybe is a good thing. So maybe we're thinking about this wrong, right? Maybe it's not about the whale and the stunning things. Maybe it's more about let's bring that stuff into the real world and make it almost more mundane.
Yep, just literally augmenting reality with
Yeah.
little bits and pieces of information here and there. And yeah, I agree. And I think that is probably the future that so many people that are enthusiasts of augmented reality see coming, is that there is information embedded all around us, whether we're aware of it or not. Everything has data associated with it.
Yeah.
So if we can just start to harness and sort of explore that metadata that's embedded in all, in objects, and be able to get information about the world around us, it could be pretty interesting. And also, for the idea of being able to learn how to change out a light switch, I think is one of the other use cases where when you've got a physical sort of static artifact and you're just trying to get information about that. That's another area I think augmented reality has huge potential. Whereas you're not going to put on a virtual reality headset and then look at a virtual reality model of a light switch to switch it out to change it out, when you could just put on an augmented reality and you're actually looking at the switch and then you're getting information about what to do to the physical artifact. I think that's really interesting.
Well, and then, with that, it's making a lot of choices for you in that, oh yeah, I recognize your exact model of light switch.
Yep.
And, I'll pull up a schematic, or your car, or whatever the case may be. But, all these things we're talking about, we're talking about like training for specific tasks, and we're talking about reading the newspaper. None of these things are games, and there's nothing wrong with that. But if you don't have games, I feel like it's going to take 5 times as long to adopt, right? People love their distractions. I mean, games are a $120 billion industry. And I don't know, for that purpose, we may just see this be a niche project, a niche product.
Well, and we saw Pokemon Go, certainly brought augmented reality gaming to the masses, but I've always felt that, and I could be completely wrong about this, but I felt like that's more of a virtual world navigated through physical coordinates. It's not, it's just so many people turn off the pass-through camera. They're not really using the augmented reality feature because it drains battery life and they're just sort of not doing that.
Right.
But they're using their physical coordinates in the real world to locate virtual objects. But I'm not sure that that's necessarily, unless if you turn that camera off, it's not really augmented reality anymore. So you're right. I think there is going to have to be some new exploration in terms of gaming. And there could be a lot going on that I'm just not aware of, but I just haven't seen it yet.
Well, so there's some interesting things going on with board games specifically. And that seems like a really good use case for augmented reality versus virtual reality. Because you need to see the facial expressions. You need to see the little details of the people you're talking to, because there's so much information in that. And even like looking at something through Skype really doesn't give you the same, that same feeling of closeness, those little subtle hints that we always give to our friends when we're talking to them. So yeah, that's the perfect case for something that's augmented, and folks are starting to, there's a lot of different ways that this is going. There was it the Meta, that was the one that's supposed to cast, and they were talking about, a big thing of that would be putting games on your table, having little social outings.
Cast AR, I think was that.
Cast AR.
Cast AR.
Yeah, they all work together.
That's right, yeah. I was excited about that. I was a backer. I thought Cast AR was really cool. I was interested in that. The reflective cloth that you had to lay down, and I had all plans to make my office covered in reflective cloth. It's going to augment the office, but yeah, for sure. Yeah, that is interesting. There's a lot of opportunities for that. And being able to play games long distances with friends and all that.
Feel like they're right there.
Yeah. What do you think, Juliana? Augmented reality? Yay, nay, thumbs up, thumbs down? Thumbs up. Well, that thumb's kind of sideways a little bit. Yeah. It's certainly going to be the world you'll be living in, I think. I think in the long run, augmented reality is going to be pretty huge. It's going to be a lot of exciting. It's going to be a very strange new world. For sure.
Well, could you think of any games that you could make in augmented reality? Anything that you currently sort of play with imagination? What could you do?
Playing with a cat, I guess. I don't know.
You know,
Virtual pets?
I thought about you when I opened the HoloLens at home. I had one of the first holograms I put was a cat on the ground. And Juliana wanted a cat for some time, so it's probably still there. If we take the HoloLens at home and we turn on the HoloLens, you'll see that cat's probably still right there on the floor of the office. So.
You should have put like some hologram food on there. Now you're just letting it starve.
Oh, that poor
you're
cat.
right.
The 3 months that we're gonna be gone, you're just gonna let that cat starve.
Hopefully, it will find it in its heart to forgive us.
Like a hide and seek or a treasure hunt kind of a game would be interesting. You could hide HoloLens or holograms around in space, and people could go and try to find them.
Like a little inventory. It's like there are like treasure chests anywhere, and you click on them, and that's like a little gold piece flies out. You go in different rooms, or there's other things.
Yeah, lots of possibilities for sure.
Well, and AR really is better for free play than VR is. You know, VR is a very curated experience. I've created this world, I bring you into it, I'm guiding you. AR, you know, a lot of what kids do and what adults should do is just, hey, let's make up a game, or hey, let's explore. And yeah, I mean, sure, let's all put on our headsets and we'll toss, you know, swords into the room, and we'll toss all this stuff, and we'll decorate it like it's a pirate's den. And
Yeah,
that could be cool.
that would be really interesting.
Board games.
Sure.
Like getting HoloLens is like paired, I guess. And then like having a board game or some sort of card game in the middle of the table.
Right. Like a lot of the games we've been playing, a lot of board games where, you know, you could imagine a time when everybody's got a lightweight AR visor, and instead of, you know, you play a card and then a 3D object comes jumping out and does some little thing, or
That's what Blizzard with Hearthstone, that's what they were trying to do in their game. And, well, and you're getting into Magic the Gathering. I mean, I am certain Wizards of the Coast would love to sell you virtual cards. They don't have to print anything. They can easily tweak them and change them. They own this virtual card, so you don't have to own an actual physical deck. You hold out your hand, you have your virtual hand of cards.
And it's like swiping them, I guess.
Yeah.
Or like a jumbo card game, or like a jumbo board game. Like chess would have like huge pieces to like move around. Like,
Yeah, why not?
grab them like this and
Well, and you know, that's a good point, is a lot of the board games you play, we were just playing Pandemic, right? And they've got tiny, tiny little pieces. And part of that is just like you have to keep it, you know, in a regular sized box. But part of it too is it's expensive to make physical games. I've talked to a number of folks. You know, we have a game, not just a game dev, but a board game dev community here in Colorado, and going off and getting these things published is a big deal. So, yeah, if you have a whole table and you've got, you know, 8 people sitting around it, why not just throw the pieces all over the place? Why not take the whole space you have?
Yeah.
It's an interesting one.
Very interesting.
yeah, Pandemic had these tiny little squares that you had to put all over this board, and then when they're flying all over the floor, there are these little tiny peoples. That you need to put them around, but it's hard. They slip around in your fingers.
Right. All right, we're live again. Sorry about the interruption. The battery life of the camera came to an end.
Goodbye, battery life. Hello, new battery life.
We should, you know, this brings up an interesting point that we should at least talk about, that we're not professional video podcasters. This is the first time I've ever done anything like this before. Maybe even the last time.
First, last, I don't know.
We don't have any professional equipment. We're just making this up as we go, having some fun, talking amongst friends here. So, no expectations, you know. That's kind of where we're at.
Yeah, but we, when the video cut out, we talked about a couple interesting things. Luckily, it didn't come out or cut out that long ago, but we were talking about issues of sort of overlapping virtual worlds. So, you know, when you put on your headset and I put on mine, do we see the same thing? And sort of the pros and cons. You know, obviously, if we're walking down the street, I want to be able to point at something. You know, you see a cat in a tree, you want to be able to show that to me. But then we talked about, you know, sort of this issue of forcing virtual content on other people, that, you know, if I'm playing a horror game and, you know, there are rotting corpses and that comes into your world and you don't want to see that, that's a little bit of sort of a, I don't know, a violation of our social contract, as it were. So how do we handle that? We want to share. We want to create this shared virtual environment, but we also want to have an off switch for it.
Mm-hmm. Maybe there could be like a private filter and then like a public filter. So like you might want to be playing your horror game, so that would be in the private section. But like other things, like trees and like a little area could be in the public section.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, some kind of way to filter the difference between things that you want to share and things you want to keep private. Mm-hmm. Maybe even some kind of a rating system, so that if there are, bad things, you can be voted on at least to be, or commented on, so that other people might be aware of that content.
Like rated like movies, like rated PG, rated PG-13.
Mm-hmm. All that kind of stuff. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. What I'm interested in is the intersection between our different digital worlds, and we talked about after the camera cut out, that, I prefer a very minimal modern aesthetic in my architectural sort of world space, and Juliana prefers worlds full of cats, and you might prefer a world of horror, I guess, with different video, all different content. So what happens when we blend those, like,
it becomes a mess.
Is there opportunities to like see this, like, and does that form, like, from an architecture? I come from a background in architecture. That's very interesting to me to imagine, like, what happens when those worlds come together and they blend, and there's this new form of sort of intermediary architecture that's blending different people's versions of realities. And what does that look like? It's just a crazy new world.
Your world and my world would probably look like modern cats.
Modern cats, there you go.
Wearing little modern outfits, little modern cat trees.
Yeah.
Playing with little modern cat toys.
Right.
And we had that blend. We had that weird blend with Second Life.
Yes, we did.
Which both of us we don't like to admit it, but we were involved with back in the day. You were doing your architecture stuff. I was actually doing, trying to do science outreach stuff. And yeah, you would get these weird places in Second Life where, we would have Sims that people would come to in their full Star Trek regalia, or dressed as a princess, or as a cat, as the case may be, and it didn't always work.
Yeah, there was interesting intersections there for sure.
Yeah.
Well, that's interesting, and even the idea of just being able to exist in a world where you can create anything you can imagine, and that's your world. That was the tagline of Second Life, virtually I think it was your world, your imagination, right? So that's a perfect analogy, where what happens when it is your world and your imagination, but now it's in the real world. And you're able to put on a headset, and you're able to see that in your reality, and if there is that opportunity to be able to create digital objects that you can't tell the difference between whether they're physical or virtual, then what do we need out of our physical environments anymore? At that point, do we live in some kind of a sort of empty warehouse type environment, but our world, our home spaces are all digital, or some sort of in between, or maybe our physical objects are just sort of like artifacts that kind of represent a thing, so that you have something tangible, but then the virtual digital version of it can be all different sort of versions of that. It's going to be interesting to see how that plays out.
It is, and it's been happening in other places, right? It's happened with books. What do I need a physical book for anymore? And of course the questions that have come out of that, of like, well, if I don't have physical books, how do I give a book that I finished to a friend? How do I pass it down to my children? Mm-hmm. I'm sure there's going to be things that we can't even imagine that are going to come out. Yeah. And and I think the problems that we're talking about, there may be folks that are watching this they're like, no, you're not going to be, bringing all this stuff into your real world and sharing it with your friends and things like that. But I think if AR is going to take off, that's precisely what it's going to be, because anything that is more private and more ephemeral, that's just VR. VR already has that covered. I'm just going to put on a headset and go into a dungeon and play, whatever D&D style game, or, whatever it is that I like. AR really is about that. It's everywhere. The boundaries are blurred. I'm sharing it with my friends. It's social. And I think if it's going to be successful, those things are going to be front and center, and we're going to have to figure those out.
Yeah, that's true. Definitely.
So yeah, it was a very interesting talk.
It was, yeah. So, well, thanks for watching. If you're still with us at this point, yeah.
I hope you didn't get bored.
We found it fascinating.
Great, yeah, that's really interesting stuff. But yeah, this future of augmented reality is going to be a very interesting world, and we look forward to seeing it. At the very least, we can look back at this video 10 or 20 years from now and laugh hysterically.
Oh yeah, at how wrong we were about everything.
Exactly, we got it all wrong, you know?
Like, this will be the before video, and then we'll make an after video, like,
Right.
10 years later.
Yeah.
And the after video will be in AR. We'll capture the 3D scene.
For sure, for sure.
The future is coming.
Yes, it is. Thanks for watching.